I'm Bill Jasper with the New American Magazine and Liberty News Network, and I'm in Reno, Nevada at LPAC 2011. And we have as our guest now at our booth Jack Hunter, well known across the country as the Southern Avenger. Gives commentary on radio in South Carolina as well as frequently on Michael Savage, Judge Napolitano, or other various other programs. And now you also are currently working directly with the Ron Paul campaign.
Sure, I'm the blogger for the Ron Paul campaign.
The blogger for the campaign. Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us today here at LPAC. And you've been writing on a lot of different topics over the last couple of years, since actually the last Ron Paul campaign.
Right.
Now, one of the areas that you have written on quite trenchantly is the whole issue of defining conservatism, which has been redefined in recent times, and so that many people who are claiming to be the leadership mantle for conservatism really aren't on track with what has traditionally been considered conservative here.
Well, you know, it was interesting. I was reading an old issue of National Review from 1960, and there was a column about whether the conservatives should support then nominee Richard Nixon. It was an open question. Should this happen? Well, here we are in 2012, and I'm 37 years old. For all of my political life, it's automatically assumed that whoever the Republican nominee is, or any Republican running anywhere, you just have to support them. We've come a long way since 1960 to now, and look where it's taken us. We have big government Republican presidents and administrations, certainly with George W. Bush, and what we saw in the last administration. We see a rampant statism on the right, often under the guise of conservatism or compassionate conservatism, and it's really a joke. And the notion that, you know, I consider American conservatism what Barry Goldwater stood for, getting back to the Constitution and, you know, sound money and all the just sort of limited government, Jeffersonian constitutionalist premises that you would think would represent a genuine American conservatism. Well, you don't have really that many candidates on the right and the Republican Party talking like that. Sometimes their rhetoric reflects that. Their records certainly don't. And when you have somebody that comes along whose critique of the modern state, which is what American conservatism is, that much of what we've done is outside the bounds of the Constitution, it's wrong, it's too expensive, it does not work. When you have a candidate like Ron Paul who comes along and says, hey, I agree with Barry Goldwater. If the Constitution says we can't do it, we won't do it. We can't afford it. It's the reason we're in this mess. The idea that that's somehow out of sorts or unusual, when it's really the bedrock of the definition of American conservatism, if Barry Goldwater still has any claim on that, or the U.S. Constitution, or the Founding Fathers, is completely absurd. And the people who criticize Congressman Paul and others like him, his son Senator Rand Paul and others, and say, well, you know, maybe you're not conservative enough because you don't represent the conventional Republican brand that's in power right now. Well, that conventional Republican brand is why we have big government in this country. We can expect the Democrats to give us big government, but we need an opposition party to stop it. Have they been very good at that? Absolutely not. And we're seeing with the Tea Party and the grassroots finally a bubbling up of genuine American conservatism again. I think it's wonderful.
You've addressed primarily big government domestic programs, which everyone should recognize has never been representative of authentic conservative beliefs here. But we also have big government warfare statism, which now many of those claiming to be the leaders of conservatism have been promoting for the last several administrations and continue to promote in Republican circles today.
Well, it has become an article of faith that you have to be pro-war to be conservative. Not only is that absurd, let's use the standards I was just using a little while ago. The confusion comes in with the Cold War versus what they're calling the War on Terror now. You know, I believe it was William F. Buckley who said that we must endure big government at home to defeat the Soviet menace, and then we would go back to the Constitution and retract. Well, we've defeated the Soviet menace. That happened at the end of the 1980s. Heroes of mine like Pat Buchanan said, hey, job well done. We've accomplished this. Now let's roll back the empire. Let's get out of NATO. Let's start limiting government again. And a lot of people in the Republican Party said, no, well, you know, we got a problem over there in Kosovo, and then 9/11 happened, and people are telling us that people are in caves and have no really, you know, organization, anything like what the Soviet Union represented with nuclear missiles and being in Cuba and all that sort of stuff, that we need to fear this outfit like we feared the Soviet Union and have the same sort of military buildup. I'm sorry. The way we got Osama bin Laden was exactly how Ron Paul suggested after 9/11 with his letter of marque and reprisal proposal. The Congress draws up a bounty, or you send a special unit to go after these people, but wars of invasion and occupation for years on end not only don't make sense, but we can't afford them. But we have people in the Republican Party that think that is the definition, personified, of conservatism. To do that, well, I can tell you, using conservative figures like Russell Kirk and Richard Weaver and Robert Nesbitt, all who were giants at National Review in the 1960s, all had the same foreign policy opinions as Ron Paul. To say that Ron Paul's a leftist is to say, oh, I don't know, Jack Kemp, the 1996 VP nominee who opposed the Iraq War, was a leftist. It's to say that Pat Buchanan was a leftist. It's to say that Robert Novak, who opposed the Iraq War, was a leftist. That is completely absurd. And to the extent that some Republican critics of Ron Paul and others of his mindset, of the sort of non-interventionist mindset, that they call that, you know, somehow leftist, means either they really don't understand the history of their own movement, the conservative movement, or they are really that ignorant. There's no excuse for
it. Do you see progress being made both on the political level and in the public opinion?
Absolutely. During the Bush years, which were some dark, dark times for those of us who believe in limited government and the Constitution, what was negotiable was for the size of government. Under George W. Bush, we doubled the size of government, we doubled the national debt. That was non-negotiable. Excuse me, that was negotiable. You could have bigger government. What was non-negotiable was foreign policy. You had to be in Iraq. If you didn't support that, you weren't a good conservative. Well, the script has flipped. Now with the Tea Party and these grassroots activists who are waking up to the Constitution, foreign policy is negotiable. Tea Partiers are willing to think, hey, we have a $15 trillion national debt, we need to reduce it. Pentagon spending, it's a third of our budget, should be on the table. That's not controversial anymore. And, you know, for those of us who believe in limiting government and having a balanced budget and getting away from this big monstrosity in Washington, D.C., that is a necessity. Entitlements alone won't do it. You have to address entitlements, you have to address our foreign policy, and you can begin to bring us back to that constitutional type of conservatism that we all recognize as the genuine American tradition.
It is quite amazing that in recent years, things like nation building and peacekeeping that were formerly associated with liberal internationalism, with one worldism and whatnot, has now been adopted by so many of the Republicans who, again, claim this is now a conservative position.
Well, that's absolutely right. Look, sovereignty has always been an important issue. America's national sovereignty. You have, as Senator Rand Paul said, when Obama decided to go to war in Libya, he consulted the Arab League, he consulted the UN, he consulted everybody but the United States Congress. Well, I'm sorry, our Constitution says that when you do these sorts of things, you know, Congress declares war, the president figures out how you wage those wars. Well, President Obama took it upon himself just to do everything. And President Bush did similar things. At least he went to Congress in some respect about Iraq, but that was still constitutionally questionable. Obama's taken this a step further. And it's awful funny, the same left that was so upset about George W. Bush with civil liberties, Guantanamo Bay, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, with the Patriot Act, you have a Democratic president doing all of that and not only maintaining it, but expanding it in some cases. And many on the left are still loyal to him. Complete blind partisanship. I see more action on the American right now towards getting back to a constitutional republic, and that includes looking at our foreign policy and domestic policy, than any time I've seen in my lifetime.
Well, that's encouraging.
Absolutely.
Thanks for stopping by, and appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Good to be with you.